Fear doesn't knock politely. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It shows up when you're about to take a step that could change your life, and it whispers something so convincing, so familiar, that most people obey it without question. Not now. Not you. Not possible. And if you're honest, you've listened to that voice more times than you'd like to admit. You've felt it in your chest, that tightness, in your thoughts, that hesitation, in your decisions, that quiet retreat. Let me ask you something. What would your life look like if fear didn't decide your next move? Not someday, not in theory, right now. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Fear is not rare. Fear is constant. The difference between those who live small and those who change the world is not the absence of fear. It is the relationship they have with it. And that relationship can be changed, but not the way you think. Most people try to eliminate fear. They try to become fearless. They wait until they feel ready. That moment never comes, because fear is not a weakness in your system. It is part of your design.
It's ancient, protective, automatic. It's trying to keep you safe. But here's what nobody tells you. What keeps you safe can also keep you stuck. And this is where the real story begins. Not out there in the world, but inside you. Because every time you hesitate, every time you hold back, every time you choose comfort over growth, there is a silent negotiation happening in your mind. One voice says, go. The other says, stay. And whichever voice you feed becomes your future. Now think about this. There was a man who lived with fear, not for a moment, not for a phase, but for decades. A man who faced uncertainty so deep, so relentless, that most people would have collapsed under its weight. And yet, he walked out of that darkness not broken, but transformed, stronger, clearer, unshakable. Not because fear disappeared, but because he understood something most never will. Courage is not about feeling strong. It is about choosing to act when every part of you feels weak. Let me ask you something again. When was the last time you did something that truly scared you? Not slightly uncomfortable, not mildly risky. I mean something that made your heart race, your mind doubt, your instincts scream stop. When was the last time you walked toward that feeling instead of away from it? Because that moment, that exact moment, is where your life begins to change. But most people turn around. They justify it. They delay it. They distract themselves from it. And slowly, they build a life that feels safe, but not alive. Now here's where it gets deeper. Fear doesn't just stop you from acting. It shapes how you see yourself. It rewrites your identity. If you avoid something long enough, you don't just say, I can't do it. You start saying, I'm not the kind of person who does that. And once identity is involved, the prison becomes invisible. Let me explain. You're not just afraid of failing. You're afraid of what failure might say about you. You're not just afraid of being judged. You're afraid to be seen. And that fear keeps you playing small. But what if I told you that fear is not showing you your limits? It's showing you the edge of your current identity. And beyond that edge is who you could become. Now stay with me, because this is where most people misunderstand everything. They think courage is loud. They think it's dramatic. They think it looks like confidence, bold moves, big speeches. But real courage is quiet. It happens in moments no one sees. It happens when you wake up and choose to try again. It happens when you speak even though your voice shakes. It happens when you continue without certainty, without applause, without guarantees. That's courage. And it doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels uncomfortable. It feels uncertain.
Sometimes it even feels wrong because you're going against your own conditioning. Now let me ask you this. What if the discomfort you're avoiding is actually the doorway to your next level? What if the thing you've been running from is the exact thing that would set you free? Most people never find out because they never stay long enough in that discomfort to discover what's on the other side. They retreat too early. They quit too soon. They listen to fear as if it's truth. But fear is not truth. Fear is a prediction, a story, a possibility, and most of the time, it's wrong. Think about it. How many times have you feared something only to realize later it wasn't as bad as you imagined? How many opportunities have you missed because you believed a story that never came true? This is how fear works. It magnifies risk and minimizes your ability to handle it. It tells you you can't before you've even tried. And if you accept that message, you never discover what you're actually capable of. Now here's the shift. The people who grow, the people who lead, the people who rise above their circumstances, they don't silence fear. They listen to it differently. Instead of asking, how do I avoid this? They ask, what is this trying to teach me? That question changes everything. Because now, fear is no longer an enemy. It becomes information. It becomes a signal that you're stepping into something meaningful, something uncertain, something that matters. And that's where growth lives, not in certainty.
Not in comfort, but in the unknown. Let me pause here and ask you something important. What are you avoiding right now? Be honest. There's something, a decision you've been delaying, a step you've been overthinking, a risk you've been postponing. You already know what it is, and the longer you wait, the heavier it feels. That's not coincidence. That's the cost of avoidance, because every time you ignore fear, it grows, not because it's getting stronger, but because you're giving it authority. But the moment you face it, even slightly, something shifts, not outside, inside. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who avoids, but as someone who acts, and that identity changes everything. Now here's what most people misunderstand. You don't need massive courage to change your life. You need small, consistent acts of courage, repeated daily, because courage is not a one-time event. It's a habit, a practice, a way of being. And every time you act despite fear, you weaken its control. Not instantly, but gradually, until one day, the things that once terrified you feel normal. And that's how transformation happens. Not in one moment, but in many. Now listen closely, because this might be the most important shift in this entire message. Fear does not disappear when you become stronger. You become stronger when you stop waiting for fear to disappear. Let that sink in. You don't wait for confidence to act. You act and confidence follows. You don't wait to feel ready. You move and readiness builds. That's the order. And most people have it backwards. They wait. They prepare endlessly. They overthink every possibility. And in doing so, they stay exactly where they are. But those who move forward, despite uncertainty, despite doubt, despite fear, they gain something far more valuable than comfort. They gain momentum, and momentum changes everything. Because once you start moving, you see progress, and progress builds belief, and belief fuels action, and action creates results, and suddenly you're no longer stuck. You're evolving. Now, let me bring this back to something deeper, because this is not just about success, it's about freedom. The freedom to express who you really are, the freedom to pursue what matters to you, the freedom to live without constantly being controlled by fear. That kind of freedom is earned, not given. And it's earned through courage, not once, but repeatedly, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Now here's a perspective most people never consider. Fear is not just something to overcome, it's something to outgrow. Because the fears you have today are tied to the person you are today. And as you grow, as your perspective expands, as your identity evolves, those fears lose relevance. They don't fit anymore. It's like outgrowing a version of yourself. But that only happens if you keep stepping forward. If you stop, you stay the same, and the same fears stay with you. So the real question is not, how do I eliminate fear? The real question is, who do I need to become so this fear no longer controls me? That's a different level of thinking. That's transformation. Now let me ask you one final question. If you knew with absolute certainty that you could handle whatever comes next, what would you do differently? What decision would you make? What step would you take? What risk would you finally accept? Hold that answer, because that version of you already exists. Not in the future, right now. The only difference is action, and courage is the bridge. So the next time fear shows up, and it will, don't push it away. Don't run from it. Pause, listen, and then move anyway. Because courage is not about feeling ready. It's about deciding that your life is too important to be controlled by fear. And when you make that decision, everything begins to change, slowly, quietly, powerfully, until one day you look back and realize the thing you feared the most became the reason you grew the most. So here's something to carry with you. Fear is not the end of your path. It is the beginning of it. And the moment you stop running is the moment you start becoming. What are you ready to face? What are you ready to step into? What are you ready to let go of? Because on the other side of that answer is a version of you that is stronger than fear. And that is where your real life begins.